Angela Jones collapsed in the courthouse as her wealthy ex-husband's lawyer shredded her character. She was losing custody of 7-year-old Mary, and there was nothing left to fight with. Before she hit the floor, a stranger in an expensive suit stepped forward and caught her. He looked directly at her ex-husband and said the words that changed everything. "She's safe now. I'll make sure of it." The marble courthouse echoed with Gary Jones' angry shouts as Angela's world tilted sideways. Her ex-husband's designer shoes clicked against the polished floor as he approached the stranger who dared interfere with his legal victory. The scent of expensive cologne couldn't mask the stench of his arrogance. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Gary demanded, his face flushed red beneath his perfectly styled hair. "This is a private custody hearing, and you have no business." "I'm Robert Mays," the stranger interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His calloused hands, unexpected beneath the tailored sleeves of his charcoal suit, supported Angela with gentle strength. "And I'm telling you this hearing is over." Angela's vision swam as she struggled to understand what was happening. One moment she'd been watching her last hope crumble as Gary's lawyer painted her as an unfit mother who couldn't provide the stability her daughter deserved. The next, she was cradled against a broad chest that smelled of sawdust and something indefinably masculine, listening to a man she'd never met claim ownership of her life. Judge Juliana Moore rapped her gavel sharply. "Order in my courtroom. Medical assistance to the plaintiff's table immediately." Her stern voice cut through the chaos as court officers moved to maintain order. Robert's arms tightened protectively around Angela as paramedics rushed into the courtroom. "I've got you," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "You're safe now." Gary's lawyer, a thin man in an even more expensive suit, placed a restraining hand on his client's arm. "Mr. Jones, I advise caution. This gentleman appears to be..." He glanced at Robert's clearly custom-tailored clothing and the confident way he held himself. "Professional." "I don't care if he's the governor," Gary snarled. "He's disrupting legal proceedings. I want him arrested for interference." The paramedics reached them, their equipment bags rattling against the wooden benches. "Sir, we need to examine the patient," the lead EMT said to Robert. Robert helped Angela to her feet, but kept one steadying hand on her elbow. "Of course, but I'm not leaving her side." Angela's knees threatened to buckle again as the full weight of her situation crashed over her. She was losing Mary. Gary's wealth, his connections, his ability to provide every material advantage. It was all going to win in the end, just as he predicted. Her love, her dedication, her desperate sacrifices as a special needs teacher barely scraping by. None of it mattered against his financial artillery. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" The paramedic's voice seemed to come from very far away. Angela Jones," she whispered, her throat raw from holding back tears during 3 hours of character assassination. "Any medical conditions? Are you on any medications?" "She's exhausted," Robert answered when Angela remained silent. "This hearing has been brutal. When did you last eat?" He directed the question to Angela, his dark eyes filled with concern that seemed utterly genuine. Yesterday morning, I think." The admission embarrassed her. She'd been too nervous to keep anything down. Gary stepped forward, his presence looming. "This is ridiculous. She's obviously having some kind of breakdown. This just proves my point about her instability." "Back off." Robert's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet that made Gary actually take a step backward. "Haven't you done enough damage?" The courthouse hallway buzzed with curious onlookers as the paramedics completed their assessment. Angela's blood pressure was elevated, her blood sugar low, but she was medically stable. Still, Robert insisted they take their time, hovering protectively as they worked. "Who are you really?" Angela finally found her voice to ask. Up close, Robert Mays was even more imposing than he'd appeared from across the courtroom. Tall and broad-shouldered, with graying temples that spoke of hard-won experience, he had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Someone who couldn't stand watching what was happening to you in there. His jaw tightened. "I lost my wife and daughter 5 years ago, watching another family being destroyed." He shook his head. "I couldn't just sit there." Angela's heart clenched at the pain that flickered across his features. I'm sorry for your loss. What I don't understand why you... Mrs. Jones? A court officer approached with 7-year-old Mary in tow. The little girl's dark eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her school uniform wrinkled from nervous fidgeting during the long wait in the children's area. Mommy? Mary launched herself into Angela's arms, nearly knocking her off balance again. Robert's steady hand immediately supported them both. Hey, baby girl, Angela whispered, breathing in the familiar scent of Mary's shampoo. I'm okay. Mommy's okay. Mary pulled back to look at her mother's pale face, then shifted her curious gaze to Robert. Who's the tall man? Robert knelt to Mary's eye level, bringing himself down to her small stature with easy grace. I'm Robert. I'm a friend of your mom's. I don't know you, Mary said with the brutal honesty of childhood. You're right, we just met. But sometimes the best friends are the ones who show up exactly when you need them. He shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it around Mary's shoulders when she shivered in the courthouse's aggressive air conditioning. Better? Mary nodded solemnly, then whispered, Are you going to help my mommy fight the mean lawyers? Robert's expression grew fierce. I'm going to help your mommy with whatever she needs. Gary had been conferring intensely with his legal team, but now he approached with renewed aggression. This little performance doesn't change anything. I still have custody rights, and some stranger playing knight in shining armor doesn't. Actually, it does change things. A new voice interrupted as a distinguished man in his 60s approached their group. Judge Moore, I'm Fred White, representing Mr. Mays. We have emergency documentation regarding this matter. Angela stared in confusion as Fred presented Judge Moore with an official-looking folder. How had Robert managed to summon a lawyer so quickly? Have you ever had a stranger step in to protect you when no one else would? Tell me about a time someone's kindness changed your life. Let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if this story is already pulling at your heartstrings. Judge Moore reviewed the documents with a deepening frown. Mr. Mays, according to these affidavits, you're claiming to be Miss Jones's fiancé? Angela's mouth fell open. What? Robert stood smoothly, his hand finding the small of Angela's back in a gesture that seemed both protective and possessive. That's correct, Your Honor. Angela and I have been in a committed relationship for several months. We kept it private during the custody proceedings to avoid any complications. But given today's circumstances, this is preposterous, Gary exploded. She's been under surveillance. There's no evidence of any relationship. Mr. Jones, Judge Moore's voice carried a warning. You had your ex-wife under surveillance? Gary's lawyer immediately began damage control, but the judge's expression had already shifted from judicial neutrality to obvious displeasure. Robert's arm slipped around Angela's shoulders, and she found herself leaning into his warmth despite her confusion. The gesture felt natural, right, in a way that made no logical sense. Your Honor, Fred continued, my client is prepared to provide financial support and stability for both Miss Jones and her daughter. His personal references include the mayor, 3 city council members, and the head of Children's Hospital. Mr. Mays owns Mays Construction, which has built half the public schools in this district. Angela's head spun. The man holding her wasn't just some good Samaritan. He was Robert Mays, the Robert Mays whose company's logo she saw on construction sites across the city. Judge Moore closed the folder and looked directly at Angela. Miss Jones, given your medical episode today and these new developments, I'm postponing this hearing for 2 weeks. This will give the court time to properly investigate these claims and ensure any decisions are made in the best interest of the child. She turned her stern gaze to Gary. All parties will refrain from any contact except through counsel during this period. Gary's face turned purple with rage. This is a sham. 2 weeks ago she was a broke teacher with no prospects, and suddenly she's engaged to one of the city's most prominent contractors. The timing is suspicious. The timing, Robert interrupted, his voice deadly quiet, is that I couldn't stand watching you destroy a good woman and her daughter any longer. He looked Gary up and down with obvious disdain. Some men protect what they love. Others tear it down to feel powerful. The courthouse hallway had filled with people drawn by the commotion, but Robert seemed oblivious to their audience. His attention remained focused on Angela and Mary, creating a protective bubble around them both. As the crowd began to disperse and court officers moved to clear the area, Angela realized she was trembling. The adrenaline crash, combined with hunger and emotional exhaustion, left her feeling hollow and unsteady. "Come on," Robert said gently. "Let's get you both somewhere quiet where you can eat and rest." "I can't. I don't understand what just happened," Angela managed. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Robert's expression softened as he studied her face. "Sometimes you don't need to know someone's whole story to recognize when they're fighting the right fight." He gestured toward Mary, who was still wrapped in his jacket. "And sometimes a little girl needs someone to stand up for her mom." Gary made one last attempt to assert control. "Angela, don't be foolish. You can't possibly think this arrangement will work. When this charade falls apart, the only thing falling apart here is your attempt to buy custody." Robert cut him off. "2 weeks, Gary. That's all the time you have left to matter in their lives." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and Gary actually took a step backward before rallying. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Maze." Mary tugged on Angela's sleeve. "Mommy, I like the tall man. He smells like the woodshop at school." Despite everything, Angela almost smiled. Trust her daughter to cut through the complexity with simple observation. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but we need to talk about everything." "We will," Robert promised. "But first, food. You're about to fall over, and Mary's had a terrible day. Everything else can wait until you're both taken care of." As they walked toward the parking garage, Robert's hand resting lightly on Angela's lower back and Mary's skipping between them, still wearing his oversized jacket, Angela couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn she could never have imagined. In the truck, a massive black pickup with leather seats that smelled like luxury, Mary fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the day's emotional trauma. Robert reached across to adjust Angela's seatbelt, his fingers brushing her collarbone as he checked the shoulder strap. "There," he murmured, his face inches from hers. "Safe." The word hung between them, loaded with promise and possibility. Angela's breath caught as she met his eyes, seeing something there that made her pulse quicken despite her exhaustion. "Robert," she began, but he shook his head gently. "Rest," he said. "We have time now. 2 weeks to figure everything out." As they drove through the city streets, Angela watched the familiar buildings blur past and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or finally taking the chance she'd been too afraid to hope for. Robert's penthouse occupied the top floor of one of downtown's most prestigious buildings. As the private elevator opened directly into his living space, Angela's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while warm lighting cast everything in golden hues that felt more like home than showroom. "This is where you live?" Mary whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the soaring ceilings and elegant furnishings. "This is where we all live now," Robert said simply, lifting the still sleepy child in his arms, "at least for the next 2 weeks." Angela's protest died on her lips as she saw how naturally Mary nestled against Robert's shoulder. Her daughter, who was usually shy with strangers, seemed to instinctively trust this man who'd appeared from nowhere to defend them. "I should explain," Robert began, but Angela shook her head. "Food first," she said, echoing his earlier words. "You were right. I can't think straight when I'm this hungry." Robert's kitchen was a chef's dream. Granite countertops, professional-grade appliances, and a massive island that could seat 6. But what caught Angela's attention were the small details. A coffee mug with a chip in the handle sitting by the sink. A child's drawing held to the refrigerator with a magnet. Fresh flowers in a simple vase. "Someone lives here," she murmured, running her fingers along the worn edge of the countertop. "I do," Robert said quietly. "This isn't a showplace, Angela. It's home." As Robert prepared a simple meal of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, comfort food that made Mary clap her hands in delight, Angela found herself studying him. His movements in the kitchen were confident but not showy, the actions of a man comfortable in his own space. When he reached around her to grab plates from the cabinet, his chest brushed her shoulder, sending an unexpected jolt of awareness through her. "Sorry," he murmured, but his eyes suggested he wasn't sorry at all. Tell me about your family, Angela said, as they sat at the kitchen island, Mary swinging her legs from the tall stool between them. Your wife and daughter. Robert's hand stilled on his soup spoon. Sarah was a pediatric nurse. Emma was 6. He glanced at Mary, who was completely absorbed in her sandwich. Car accident on a rainy Tuesday. Drunk driver ran a red light. I'm so sorry. Angela's hand moved instinctively to cover his. That's why you stepped in today? You couldn't watch another child lose her stability. Partly. Robert turned his hand palm up, capturing her fingers in his. But mostly because watching you fight for Mary reminded me what real love looks like. Gary doesn't love her. He wants to own her. There's a difference. Mary looked up from her food. My daddy doesn't like it when I cry. He says it makes him look bad. Angela's heart clenched. Oh, sweetheart, my Emma used to cry during thunderstorms, Robert said gently to Mary. So we'd build blanket forts and tell stories until the rain stopped. Crying just means you have feelings. That's a good thing. Can we build a blanket fort here? Mary asked hopefully. Absolutely, after dinner. Robert's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that transformed his entire face. As the evening progressed, Angela found herself relaxing despite the surreal circumstances. Robert's penthouse had multiple guest rooms, and he insisted she and Mary take the largest one, a beautiful space with its own sitting area and ensuite bathroom. I can't impose like this, Angela protested as Robert showed her to the guest room. You don't owe us anything. You're not imposing. Robert's hand brushed hers as he handed her a set of towels, the brief contact sending warmth racing up her arm. And this isn't about obligation, it's about choice. What choice? The choice to do what's right instead of what's convenient. His dark eyes held hers steadily. I could have walked away today, told myself it wasn't my business, but I didn't want to live with that regret. That night, after Mary fell asleep in the massive guest bed, Angela found herself wandering Robert's penthouse. She discovered his home office, where architectural drawings covered every surface. Models of buildings sat on shelves alongside photos, most of them showing construction sites and completed projects, but a few personal shots caught her attention. One photo showed Robert with a woman who had to be Sarah, a beautiful brunette with kind eyes and a warm smile. They were both laughing, caught in a moment of pure joy. Another showed a little girl with Robert's dark hair and Sarah's smile, her gap-toothed grin radiating happiness. That's Emma's school picture from the year she died, Robert's voice came from behind her. Angela spun around, embarrassed to be caught looking. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. You weren't prying. This is your home too now, at least temporarily. Robert moved to stand beside her, studying the photo. She would have been about Mary's age now. Is that why you're helping us? Because we remind you of them? Robert was quiet for a long moment. At first maybe. But no, not anymore. He turned to face her fully. You're not Sarah, and Mary isn't Emma. You're yourselves. Strong, brave, beautiful yourselves. And that's who I'm falling for. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Angela's breath caught at the intensity in his expression. Robert, she began, but he stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. I know this is fast. I know it's crazy. But I also know that life is fragile and unpredictable. And sometimes the most important moments happen when you're not looking for them. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Angela found herself leaning into the touch, starving for tenderness after years of Gary's emotional cruelty. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I, Robert admitted. But I'm more scared of letting fear keep me from living. The space between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Angela could feel herself drawn to him, pulled by something deeper than gratitude or circumstance. This was attraction, pure and simple, the kind she thought she was too broken to feel again. Just as Robert's head began to lower toward hers, Mary's voice rang out from the guest room. Mommy? I can't sleep. They spread apart, both breathing hard. Robert's eyes held a promise as Angela backed toward the door. Rain check? He asked softly. Angela nodded, not trusting her voice, and hurried to comfort her daughter. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Robert left early for work, but not before making breakfast for all 3 of them. Angela spent her days exploring the city with Mary, who was enrolled temporarily at a private school just blocks from Robert's building. The school's director, Dr. Jenny Hall, was a friend of Robert's and immediately understood Mary's need for stability during the custody transition. Mays has excellent instincts about children, Dr. Williams told Angela during Mary's enrollment interview. He's funded our special needs program for years. Any child he vouches for is welcome here. Each evening, Robert returned home with stories of his day and genuine interest in theirs. He helped Mary with homework at the kitchen island while Angela prepared dinner, their domestic interactions charged with growing intimacy. On the third night, as they cleaned up after Mary's bath, Angela found herself working alongside Robert in a dance they seemed to have choreographed without words. When they reached for the same dish towel, their hands tangled together, and this time neither pulled away. Angela, Robert's voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." That night, after Mary was asleep, Angela joined Robert on his balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool, and he draped a soft throw blanket around her shoulders, his hands lingering on her arms. "Tell me about your marriage," he said gently. "Help me understand what Gary put you through." Angela pulled the blanket tighter, gathering courage. "He made me feel invisible unless he needed something to criticize. Every decision had to be approved, every purchase justified. He controlled the money, the car, even my access to Mary when we separated. And you stayed because I thought love was supposed to be hard work. Because he convinced me I was lucky he tolerated my flaws." Angela's voice grew stronger. "Because I was afraid to believe I deserved better." Robert's jaw tightened with controlled anger. "You deserved everything, Angela. Respect, support, partnership. Love shouldn't make you smaller." "How do you know?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Your marriage was happy. Sarah loved you the way wives are supposed to love husbands." "Sarah and I had our struggles too," Robert said quietly. "We lost 2 babies before Emma was born. There were nights we barely spoke, days we couldn't be in the same room. But we fought for each other, not against each other. We built each other up instead of tearing each other down." Angela found herself crying, not the desperate tears of loss, but the healing tears of recognition. "I want that," she whispered. "I want to be strong enough to believe I deserve it." "You are strong enough." Robert's voice was fierce with conviction. "You fought Gary for 2 years to protect Mary. You work with special needs children who require infinite patience and creativity. You collapsed in that courtroom not from weakness, but from exhaustion from being strong for so long with no support." When Robert's arms came around her, Angela didn't resist. She melted into his warmth, feeling safer than she had in years. His lips pressed against her temple, a gentle kiss that promised protection and partnership. "I'm falling in love with you," he murmured against her hair. "Not because you need saving, but because you're already amazing just as you are." Angela pulled back to look into his eyes, seeing truth and tenderness that made her chest tight with emotion. "I'm falling in love with you too, and that terrifies me." "Good," Robert said with a soft smile. "It should be terrifying. The best things usually are." When he lowered his head this time, Angela rose to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, questioning, full of promise and possibility. But as Angela's hands fisted in Robert's shirt and he pulled her closer, the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the darkness. "We should go slow," Angela whispered, even as every cell in her body argued otherwise. "We should," Robert agreed, his thumb tracing her swollen lower lip. "But I don't think I can." "Robert." The sharp ring of Angela's phone shattered the moment. Gary's name flashed on the screen, and Angela's face went pale. "Don't answer it," Robert said immediately. But Angela was already swiping to accept the call, her protective instincts overriding everything else. "Gary, what's wrong? Is it Mary?" "Your little charade is over, Angela." Gary's voice was thick with rage and alcohol. "I know what's really going on between you and your construction worker. When I'm finished, you'll be lucky to get supervised visitation." Robert took the phone from Angela's trembling hands before she could respond. "Gary," Robert's voice was deadly calm. "It's after 10 o'clock. You've been drinking, and you're harassing the mother of your child. I'm recording this call, and it's going directly to your lawyer and Judge Moore in the morning." "You son of a—" "No," Robert cut him off. "You're done threatening her. From now on, any communication goes through counsel. If you contact Angela directly again, I'll file a restraining order so fast it'll make your head spin." He ended the call and immediately pulled Angela into his arms as she began to shake. "He's going to destroy this," she whispered against his chest. "He'll find a way to prove this is all fake, and then I'll lose Mary forever." "Hey." Robert tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Look at me. This isn't fake. What I feel for you, what you feel for me, that's real, and we're going to prove it." "How?" Robert's expression grew determined, and Angela saw a glimpse of the steel that had built his business empire. "By living it. By showing Judge Moore and everyone else that we're not playing house. We're building a family." As they stood wrapped in each other's arms on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below them like fallen stars, Angela felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in years, she dared to hope for a future that included not just survival, but happiness. But Gary's call had reminded them both that their newfound love would have to survive a battle that was far from over. The morning after Gary's threatening call, Robert was unusually quiet during breakfast. Angela caught him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, as if he was memorizing every detail of her face. The way she stirred cream into her coffee, the little furrow between her brows when she concentrated on helping Mary with a math problem, the soft smile that appeared when Mary made her laugh. "Mary's having a sleepover at her new friend Sophie's house tonight," he said casually, buttering toast with careful precision. "Sophie's mother called yesterday. Apparently the girls have been planning it all week." Angela's breath caught. A night alone with Robert. The possibility hung between them like a challenge. Electric with unspoken promise. "That's nice for Mary," she managed, her voice slightly breathless. "She's made such good friends at the new school." "She has." Robert's eyes met hers across the kitchen island, dark and intent. "She's thriving here. You both are." The subtext was clear. This could be their life. Not just the pretense for the custody hearing, but reality. A family built on love instead of manipulation. Partnership instead of control. Mary looked up from her cereal bowl, oblivious to the charged atmosphere between the adults. Sophie's mom said, "We can paint our nails and watch movies all night. And she has a pool with lights that change colors." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Angela said, forcing herself to focus on her daughter instead of the way Robert's fingers traced patterns on his coffee mug. The same gentle, deliberate movements she imagined those hands making on her skin. "Will you miss me?" Mary asked with 7-year-old directness. "Every minute," Robert answered before Angela could speak, his voice completely sincere. "But sometimes grown-ups need time to talk about important things, and it's easier when little ears aren't listening." Mary giggled at being called little ears, but seemed satisfied with the explanation. After breakfast, she disappeared to pack her overnight bag with the methodical care of a child who'd learned to value security in small rituals. That afternoon, while Mary was at school, Angela found herself preparing for the evening with the kind of nervous anticipation she hadn't felt since she was a teenager. She stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, rejecting outfit after outfit. Too formal, too casual, too obvious. Not obvious enough. Finally, she drove to the boutique district downtown, using one of Robert's credit cards, at his insistence, to buy something that made her feel beautiful instead of merely appropriate. The deep blue silk dress she chose skinned her curves without clinging, the color bringing out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. The saleswoman, a stylish woman in her 50s, smiled knowingly. "Special evening?" she asked as she wrapped the dress in tissue paper. "Very special," Angela admitted, blushing like a schoolgirl. "He's a lucky man," the woman said warmly. "Wear it with confidence. Nothing is more beautiful than a woman who knows she's loved." Back at the penthouse, Angela took her time getting ready. A long bath with the expensive oils Robert kept stocked in the guest bathroom. Careful attention to her makeup, the dress that transformed her from tired single mother to radiant woman. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone worthy of passionate love. A realization that brought tears to her eyes. "You look beautiful," Robert breathed when she emerged from the guest room that evening. He'd changed from his work clothes into dark slacks and a crisp white shirt. The sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms that made her stomach flutter. His hair was still damp from the shower, and she caught the scent of his cologne. Something woody and masculine that made her want to step closer. "So do you," Angela replied, then blushed at her boldness. But Robert's smile suggested he appreciated her honesty. "Are you ready for our date, Angela Jones?" He offered his arm with old-fashioned gallantry. "Our first real date," she realized aloud. "Everything else has been crisis management and survival. Then tonight, we're just Robert and Angela. Not players in Gary's drama, not people with a legal case to win. Just two people who've fallen in love and want to celebrate that fact." Robert had arranged for them to have dinner on the building's rooftop garden, a private space normally reserved for special events. String lights twinkled overhead like captured stars, and candles flickered on a table set for two with crisp white linens and fresh flowers. The city spread out below them in a glittering tapestry, but Angela only had eyes for the man who'd done all this for her. "When did you have time to arrange this?" she asked as Robert pulled out her chair with practiced grace. "I called in a favor this morning," he admitted, his hand briefly touching her shoulder as he helped her sit. The simple contact sent warmth radiating through her body. "I wanted tonight to be special, not because we have to prove anything to anyone, but because you deserve to be celebrated." "Celebrated for what?" "For being you. For fighting so hard for Mary. For being brave enough to trust again after Gary tried to break your spirit." Robert's eyes were intense in the candlelight. "For making me remember what it feels like to want to come home to someone." The building's catering service had prepared a meal that was both elegant and comforting. Pan-seared salmon with lemon butter, roasted vegetables, wild rice pilaf. But Angela found herself barely tasting the food, too aware of Robert's presence across the small table. The way his eyes followed every movement of her lips when she spoke. The increasing tension that seemed to shimmer in the air between them. "Tell me about your dreams," Robert said over the main course. "Not the practical plans or the goals you think you should have. The secret dreams you're afraid to say out loud." Angela set down her fork, considering the question seriously. "I want to change how people think about learning differences, not just accommodate them, but celebrate them. Some of the most creative, brilliant minds I've ever encountered were children who couldn't fit into traditional educational boxes. Like Mary. But also like Tommy, who couldn't read until he was 10, but could build complex mechanical structures from memory. Or Sarah, who struggled with math but could write poetry that made grown adults cry." Angela's voice grew passionate as she spoke about her students. "I want to create schools where children like them aren't seen as problems to be solved, but as gifts to be nurtured." "That's not a dream," Robert said quietly. "That's a calling, and it's going to happen." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I've seen you with Mary, with the children at her new school. You don't just teach them, you see them, really see them. That's a rare gift." Robert reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "And because I'm going to help you make it happen. We're going to build something beautiful together." The word "together" hung in the air, loaded with promise and possibility. Angela felt tears threaten at the casual way Robert included himself in her future, as if their partnership was already a settled fact. "What about your dreams?" she asked, turning her hand palm up to lace their fingers together. Robert was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I used to dream about making enough money to feel secure. Then, it was about building the biggest projects, having the most prestigious clients. After Sarah and Emma died, I stopped dreaming altogether. And now I dream about Saturday mornings with you and Mary. Teaching her to drive when she's 16. Walking her down the aisle someday. Growing old with you and watching our grandchildren play in that pool she loves so much." Angela's breath caught. "Grandchildren? Too fast?" Robert asked with a self-conscious smile. No, Angela said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Not too fast enough. They lingered over dessert. Chocolate mousse that tasted like sin and temptation. Their conversation ranging from childhood memories to philosophical discussions about life and loves. Angela told Robert about her grandmother's garden and the summer she'd spent learning that beautiful things required patience and care. Robert shared stories about learning construction from his father, about the first building he'd ever designed, about the day he'd decided to start his own company with nothing but determination and a truck full of tools. I was terrified, he admitted. 26 years old, married to a woman who believed in me more than I believed in myself, trying to build something meaningful in a world full of people who thought I was too young, too inexperienced, too ambitious. But you did it anyway, because Sarah convinced me that the worst thing that could happen wasn't failure. It was spending my life wondering, what if? Robert's expression grew tender. She'd like you, Angela. She'd love how you mother Mary, how you've helped me remember that love doesn't diminish when you share it. It multiplies. As the evening progressed, Angela found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. Robert listened to her with complete attention, asked thoughtful questions, and shared his own vulnerabilities with startling honesty. There was no judgment, no criticism, no attempt to reshape her into someone else's vision of what she should be. I haven't been with anyone since Sarah, he admitted, as they lingered over coffee, the city lights twinkling below them like fallen stars. Not even casually. I convinced myself I was protecting Emma's memory, but really I was protecting myself from the possibility of loss. What changed? Angela asked softly, though she suspected she knew the answer. Robert reached across the table to take her hand again, his touch gentle but possessive. You did. Watching you fight for Mary, seeing your strength and your grace under pressure, you made me remember that love isn't about avoiding pain, it's about finding someone worth the risk. Are we worth the risk? Angela asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Angela, Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. You and Mary are worth every risk I could possibly take. When they returned to the penthouse, the atmosphere between them was charged with unspoken desire. Angela's skin felt hypersensitive, aware of every brush of Robert's fingers as he helped her with her jacket, every stolen glance as they moved through his living space. The air itself seemed to hum with possibility. Would you like some wine? Robert asked, his voice rougher than usual. Yes, Angela whispered, though what she really wanted had nothing to do with wine and everything to do with the man standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Robert moved to the kitchen, his movements efficient but slightly unsteady, betraying his own nervousness. Angela followed, drawn by an invisible thread, and found herself standing close enough to watch the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he worked the corkscrew. This is a 1998 Bordeaux, he said, focusing intently on the wine label. I've been saving it for a special occasion. What makes tonight special? Angela asked, stepping closer until she was near enough to smell his cologne, mixed with the subtle scent of his skin. Robert's hand stilled on the bottle. Tonight is the first time in 5 years I felt completely alive, the first time I've believed in forever again. He turned to face her, setting the unopened wine aside. Tonight is when I stop being afraid of losing you, and start being grateful that I found you. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with promise and possibility. Angela's heart raced as she saw the desire in Robert's eyes, the careful restraint he was maintaining for her sake. Robert, she said, her voice barely audible. Tell me what you want. Angela, he said softly, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. Tell me what you need. Instead of answering with words, Angela rose on her toes and kissed him. This kiss was different from their first tentative exploration. This was a claiming, a surrender, a promise of everything they could be together. Robert's arms came around her, pulling her against him as the kiss deepened, months of restrained longing finally finding expression. Angela could taste wine and desire on his lips, could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her chest. When his mouth moved to her throat, pressing soft kisses along the sensitive skin, She gasped and tangled her fingers in his hair, holding him close. "I want you," she whispered against his ear, the admission sending a shiver through both of them. "I want all of you." Robert pulled back to look into her eyes, his own dark with desire and something deeper. "I love you, Angela. Not because of the circumstances, not because of Mary, but because of who you are. Your strength, your compassion, your beautiful heart that's been hurt but refuses to stop loving." "I love you too," Angela breathed, her hands moving to the buttons of his shirt. "I love your kindness, your integrity, the way you make me believe I deserve to be cherished." "You do deserve it," Robert said fiercely, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You deserve everything beautiful this world has to offer." Robert's bedroom was a sanctuary of warm colors and soft textures, dominated by a massive bed that looked out over the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Moonlight streamed across the hardwood floors, creating patterns of silver and shadow that seemed to dance in the warm air. "You're trembling," Robert observed, his hands gentle on her shoulders as he studied her face in the moonlight. "Not from fear," Angela assured him, her voice steady despite the emotions coursing through her. "From anticipation, from wanting this so much it almost frightens me." "We can take this as slowly as you need," Robert said, though the strain in his voice suggested his own need was barely contained. "I don't want slow," Angela said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I want to feel alive again. I want to remember what it's like to be wanted for who I am, not who someone else thinks I should be." With infinite care, Robert reached for the zipper of her dress, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're magnificent," he whispered as the silk pulled at her feet like liquid starlight. "You take my breath away." When Angela reached for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers shook slightly, but not from nerves. From the overwhelming rightness of the moment, the perfect inevitability of their coming together. Robert's chest was broad and strong, marked with the small scars that spoke of a life lived fully, hands-on work that built things meant to last. "Let me," Robert said gently when her fingers fumbled with his belt, covering her hands with his. Together, they worked to remove the remaining barriers between them, their movements slow and deliberate, building anticipation with every inch of skin revealed. When they finally came together on Robert's bed, it was with a passion that surprised them both in its intensity. Angela had thought she understood desire, but what she felt with Robert transcended anything she'd experienced before. This wasn't just physical need, it was emotional communion, two souls recognizing their perfect match in each other. Robert worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, erasing years of feeling inadequate and unwanted. Under his touch, Angela discovered she was beautiful, desirable, worthy of passionate love. Every caress seemed designed to heal the wounds Gary had inflicted on her self-worth. Every whispered endearment rebuilding her belief in her own value. "You're so beautiful," Robert murmured against her skin, his lips tracing patterns of fire across her collarbone. "So perfect. I can't believe you're mine." "I am yours," Angela whispered back, her hands exploring the hard planes of his chest, the tender spots that made him groan her name. "Completely yours." When she returned his caresses, exploring the landscape of his body with growing confidence, she felt powerful in a way that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with mutual surrender. This was what love felt like, not the desperate clinging she'd mistaken for affection with Gary, but the generous giving and receiving of pleasure, comfort, and complete acceptance. Their joining was both tender and fierce, a dance of give and take that left them both breathless and transformed. In Robert's arms, Angela found healing for wounds she'd carried for years. The careful way he held her, the reverent way he spoke her name, the absolute attention he paid to her pleasure, it all combined to make her feel cherished in ways she'd never experienced. In Angela's love, Robert found the courage to open his heart completely, without reservation or fear. The way she touched him, looked at him, responded to him, it was like being reborn. For 5 years he'd felt half alive, going through the motions of living without really feeling. With Angela, every sensation was magnified, every emotion more vivid and real. "I love you," he whispered as they moved together, their bodies perfectly synchronized, two people becoming one in the most intimate way possible. "I love you too," Angela replied, her voice breaking with emotion as she felt herself surrender completely to the man who'd caught her when she was falling and taught her to fly again. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, skin damp with exertion, hearts slowly returning to normal rhythm. Angela traced lazy patterns on Robert's chest while he stroked her hair, both reluctant to break the perfect intimacy of the moment. "No regrets?" Robert asked softly, echoing the question that had become their private ritual. "None," Angela replied without hesitation, pressing a soft kiss to his chest. "You?" "Only that we waited this long," Robert said, his arms tightening around her. "I could have been holding you like this for weeks." Angela smiled against his skin. "We weren't ready weeks ago. We needed time to build trust, to be sure of what we were feeling. And now?" "Now I'm sure of everything," Angela said, lifting her head to look into his eyes. "I'm sure I love you. I'm sure I want to build a life with you. I'm sure Mary is the luckiest little girl in the world to have you as her stepfather." Robert's expression grew tender. "And I'm sure that I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I'm sure that what we have is worth fighting for, no matter what Gary or anyone else throws at us." They talked through the night, sharing the intimate conversations that lovers exchange in the darkness. Angela told Robert about her fears of not being good enough, smart enough, pretty enough. Robert shared his guilt about moving on from Sarah, his worry that loving again somehow diminished what he'd had with his first wife. "Love doesn't work that way," Angela said softly, her fingers intertwined with his. "It's not a finite resource. Loving me doesn't mean you loved Sarah any less. It means your heart is big enough for both." "How did you get so wise?" Robert asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Years of therapy after my marriage to Gary ended," Angela admitted with a self-conscious laugh. "I had to learn the difference between healthy love and manipulation, between partnership and control." "And what did you learn?" "That real love makes you feel stronger, not weaker. It builds you up instead of tearing you down. It gives you courage to be your best self instead of making you afraid to be yourself at all." Robert was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. "Gary really did a number on you, didn't he?" "He tried to," Angela said, her voice growing stronger. "But he didn't succeed. I'm here, I'm whole, and I'm capable of loving and being loved. That's what matters." As dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Angela realized she never felt more complete. In Robert's arms, she wasn't the broken woman who'd collapsed in a courthouse. She was whole, cherished, home. "I should check on Mary," Angela murmured as sunlight streamed through the windows, though she made no move to leave the warmth of Robert's embrace. "Sophie's mother will call if there are any problems," Robert said, pulling her closer. "And I want to remember this morning exactly as it is. Perfect? Beyond perfect. Transformative." Angela was about to respond when a sharp, urgent beeping filled the air. The building's fire alarm system had activated, sending piercing wails echoing through the penthouse that shattered their peaceful morning like breaking glass. They sprang apart, reaching for robes and clothes as the automated voice announced, "This is not a drill. Please evacuate the building immediately, using the nearest stairwell." "Mary," Angela gasped, her maternal instincts immediately overriding everything else. Even though logic reminded her that Mary was safe at Sophie's house. "She's at Sophie's house," Robert reminded her, but he was already reaching for his phone with hands that shook slightly. "I'm calling to make sure they're okay." As they hurried to dress, the fire alarm continued its relentless warning. Through the windows, Angela could see fire trucks racing toward their building, their red lights flashing against the morning sky like omens of disaster. But when Robert's phone connected to Sophie's mother, his face went white in a way that made Angela's blood turn to ice. "What do you mean Mary's not there?" he said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Where is she?" Angela felt the bottom drop out of her world as Robert's expression grew increasingly grim. Their perfect night of love and connection was about to become their worst nightmare. "She came home early," Sophie's mother Linda explained over the phone, her voice strained with worry and confusion. "About an hour ago. She was crying and said her stomach hurt and she wanted her mommy. Gary was waiting outside in his car. He said you'd sent him to pick her up because you were sick and needed Mary home immediately. Angela's legs gave out, and she sank onto Robert's bed, still rumpled from their night of love. The contrast between the intimacy they'd just shared and this moment of terror was jarring, like being violently awakened from a beautiful dream. I never sent him. Gary isn't supposed to have any contact with Mary during the recess period. Judge Noor was very clear about that. Robert was already pulling on clothes with swift, practiced movements, his face grin with determination. Linda, did Mary seem upset when she left? Did she go willingly? She was crying harder when Gary arrived, Linda admitted, her voice thick with guilt. But Gary said Angela was having some kind of medical emergency and needed Mary home immediately. He was very convincing, very concerned. I tried calling you, Angela, but it went straight to voicemail. Angela fumbled for her phone with trembling hands, realizing she'd turned it off during their romantic dinner the night before. When she powered it on, 17 missed calls from Gary appeared on her screen, along with a series of increasingly threatening text messages that made her stomach churn. The first few messages were deceptively reasonable. Need to discuss Mary's schedule. Important custody matter. But they quickly escalated into something much darker. Enjoying your sleepover with your boyfriend? Hope it was worth destroying your daughter's future. Some mothers actually put their children first. He's been calling all night, she whispered, scrolling through the messages with growing horror. He knows. About us. About last night. Robert read over her shoulder, his jaw tightening with each venomous word. Gary's texts painted a picture of Angela as an unfit mother who'd abandoned her daughter to satisfy her own selfish desires, complete with threats to use this evidence to destroy her in court. Look at the timestamps, Robert said grimly. He started calling at 10 p.m., right after we went up to the roof for dinner. He's been watching us. The fire alarm suddenly stopped, replaced by the building's PA system. False alarm. Residents may return to their units. We apologize for the inconvenience. He triggered the fire alarm, Robert realized, his voice deadly quiet. He wanted us out of the building, panicked and separated from Mary. This whole thing was orchestrated. Angela was already dialing Gary's number, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hit the right buttons. It rang twice before his familiar voice answered, dripping with satisfaction and barely contained glee. Enjoying your morning, Angela? I hope your night of passion was worth it. Where is Mary? Angela demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady, when every instinct screamed at her to fall apart. You have no right to take her during the court recess. I have every right to protect my daughter from her mother's poor choices. Gary replied smugly, his tone suggesting he was relishing every moment of Angela's panic. Mary is safe with me, which is more than I can say, for the environment you've been exposing her to. Gary, please. Angela's voice cracked, despite her efforts to stay strong. She's scared and confused. She doesn't understand what's happening. Just bring her home. Home? Gary laughed coldly, the sound like breaking glass through the phone speaker. You mean your boyfriend's sex den? I don't think so. Mary will stay with me until Judge Moore can review the new evidence I've gathered about your fitness as a mother. What evidence? Robert interjected, taking the phone from Angela's trembling hands. Well, if it isn't the homewrecker himself. Gary's voice turned even more vicious. Evidence that Angela abandoned her 7-year-old daughter for an entire night to engage in inappropriate sexual activity with a man she barely knows. Evidence that she's so desperate for male attention that she's willing to put her child at risk. That's a lie, Robert said, his voice deadly calm, despite the rage Angela could see building in his expression. Mary was at a supervised sleepover with a friend. That's normal, healthy childhood activity. Normal? Gary's voice rose to a near shout. What's normal about exposing a vulnerable child to a revolving door of male companions? What's normal about a mother prioritizing her sexual needs over her daughter's emotional well-being? A line went dead, leaving them staring at the phone in horror. "We have to call the police," Angela said. But Robert was already shaking his head. Gary's her father, and technically, he's not violating the custody order since it doesn't explicitly forbid him from taking Mary during what could be considered his scheduled time. The police will treat this as a civil matter, unless we can prove she's in immediate physical danger. Then what do we do? Angela felt panic rising in her chest like floodwater. Her daughter was gone, taken by a man whose idea of love was possession and control. Robert's expression was fierce with protective determination. "We get her back, and we end this, permanently." Over the next 3 hours, Robert's penthouse became a war room that would have impressed a military commander. Fred White, Robert's lawyer, arrived with a team of legal assistants carrying files and laptops. Private investigators were dispatched to locate Gary's whereabouts, their network of contacts spreading across the city like a spider web. Robert himself worked his extensive network of contacts throughout the city, calling in favors and gathering intelligence with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex operations. Angela felt helpless watching Robert orchestrate this massive effort to retrieve her daughter. The man who'd held her so tenderly just hours before had transformed into a force of nature, wielding power and influence she'd never imagined. Phone calls to judges, politicians, business leaders. Robert seemed to know everyone who mattered in the city. "Judge Morrison owes me a favor," Robert said, hanging up from one call and immediately dialing another. "His daughter's school was built by my company at cost when the city's budget fell short. He's agreed to review emergency custody modifications if we can present evidence of Gary's violations." "What about Detective Rivera?" asked Jamie Brooks, one of Robert's investigators, looking up from her laptop. "She handled that child welfare case for the mayor's office last year." "Good thinking," Robert replied, already dialing. "Carmen, it's Robert Mays. I need a favor." Angela watched this display of raw power and influence with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Robert was using every connection he had to help her, but she couldn't shake the worry that she was destroying his carefully built life by dragging him into her chaos. "I found them," announced Jamie Brooks suddenly, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "Gary took Mary to his mother's estate in Harbor Hills. My sources say he's planning to drive to his sister's house in North Carolina tonight, somewhere outside Judge Moore's jurisdiction." "He's running," Fred said grimly, looking up from his legal briefs. "If he gets Mary across state lines, this becomes infinitely more complicated. Interstate custody disputes can take months to resolve." Angela wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold despite the warm morning. The penthouse that had felt like home just hours before now felt like a fortress under siege. "This is my fault. I should have known Gary would retaliate. I should have been more careful, more protective." Robert immediately abandoned his strategy session and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms, despite the room full of people watching. "This is not your fault. Gary is a narcissist who can't stand losing control. He would have found an excuse to escalate, no matter what we did. But if we hadn't, Angela's voice broke as she struggled to voice her deepest fear. If we hadn't fallen in love? Robert tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes while his legal team politely focused on their work. "Angela, what happened between us last night was beautiful and right. Don't let Gary poison that." "How can you be so calm?" Angela pulled away, pacing to the windows overlooking the city, where somewhere her terrified daughter was being held by a man who saw her as a weapon rather than a child. "Mary is terrified and confused, and it's because I chose my happiness over her safety." "You chose love over fear," Robert corrected firmly, following her to the windows. "And we're going to get Mary back safely. Together." The word hit Angela like a physical blow. Together, despite everything, Gary's threats, the custody battle, the impossible circumstances that had brought them into each other's lives. Robert was still talking about together. "Why?" she whispered, her breath fogging the glass as she stared down at the street below. "Why are you still here? This isn't your fight, Robert. You could walk away right now and go back to your quiet, successful life." "Because I love you." Robert said without hesitation. Both of you. Because Mary drew me a picture yesterday of our new family and asked if I wanted to be her Robert daddy. Because for the first time in 5 years, I wake up excited about the future instead of haunted by the past. Angela's eyes filled with tears. She drew you a picture? It's on my bathroom mirror, Robert admitted, his voice soft with emotion. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a pool. She wrote, "My family" in purple crayon at the top. There are flowers everywhere and a sun with a smiley face. The image broke something loose in Angela's chest, a knot of fear and self-doubt she'd been carrying since the custody battle began. Mary wasn't just enduring this situation, she was embracing it. She wanted Robert in their lives as much as Angela did. "We have to get her back," Angela said, strength returning to her voice. "We will," Robert promised, his hands firm on her shoulders. "Fred has a plan." An hour later, they were in Robert's truck, heading toward Harbor Hills. Fred's legal team following in a separate vehicle, loaded with documents and recording equipment. The plan was simple, but risky. Confront Gary directly, with Judge Moore on speakerphone to witness any violations of the court order. "He'll be expecting anger," Fred had explained during the strategy session. "Show him calm authority instead. Make him understand that he's not just fighting Angela anymore. He's fighting all of us. The entire weight of your reputation and influence, Robert." As they drove through the affluent neighborhoods leading to Harbor Hills, Angela's palms grew sweaty despite the truck's air conditioning. She'd only been to Gary's mother's estate once before, during their brief marriage, and the memory was unpleasant. Vivian Jones treated her like a temporary inconvenience, someone far beneath her son's social station. "Tell me about Vivian," Robert said, as if reading her thoughts. "She's formidable," Angela said carefully. "Old Charleston money, very concerned with appearances and social standing. She never approved of Gary marrying me. I wasn't wealthy enough, connected enough, sophisticated enough for her precious son. And now she probably sees me as exactly what she always thought I was, a gold-digging opportunist who trapped her son with an unplanned pregnancy." Angela's voice was bitter with old pain. "She'll use this against me however she can." As they drove through the gates of the exclusive Harbor Hills community, Angela felt a familiar tightness in her chest that came from entering spaces where she clearly didn't belong. The perfectly manicured grounds and imposing architecture were designed to intimidate, to remind visitors of their place in the social hierarchy. "Breathe," Robert said softly, taking Angela's hand as they approached the massive colonial mansion that screamed old money and entitlement. "Remember, we have the moral high ground here. Gary is the one acting irrationally." They found Gary's BMW in the circular driveway, along with several other expensive cars that suggested he'd called in reinforcements. Through the mansion's front windows, Angela could see people moving around inside, lawyers, probably, and possibly other family members ready to close ranks around Gary. "Mrs. Jones has hired her own legal team," Fred observed, studying the luxury vehicles. "This is going to be more complicated than we thought." As they approached the front door, it opened before they could knock. Gary stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who were obviously high-powered attorneys. Behind them, Angela caught a glimpse of Mary sitting on an ornate sofa that dwarfed her small frame, looking lost and scared in the grand room. "Mommy." Mary tried to run toward her, but Gary caught her arm with the casual cruelty that had characterized his parenting throughout their marriage. "Stay with grandmother Mary," he said firmly, his grip tight enough to leave marks. "Mommy and her friend are just visiting." "Gary, let her go," Angela said, citing to keep her voice steady, despite the rage building in her chest at seeing him handle Mary so roughly. "This isn't about us anymore. Mary is scared and wants to come home." "Home?" Gary's laugh was bitter and sharp. You mean the penthouse where you're playing house with a man you've known for less than a week? Where you abandoned our daughter to satisfy your own selfish desires? I never abandoned Mary, Angela replied, her voice growing stronger as her maternal instincts overrode. The week following Mary's rescue should have been a time of healing and strengthening bonds, but Gary's threat hung over them like a storm cloud. Angela threw herself into creating normalcy for Mary, school pickups, homework help, bedtime stories, while trying to ignore the black SUV that seemed to follow them everywhere. Private investigators, Robert explained when Angela pointed out the surveillance. Gary's hired a team to document our every move. What are they looking for? Angela asked, though she suspected she already knew. Evidence that we're not a real family, that our relationship is a sham, designed to win custody. Robert's jaw tightened as he watched the SUV from their kitchen window. They're hoping to catch us in some kind of inconsistency. What the investigators caught instead was a family genuinely in love. Robert teaching Mary to swim in the building's pool, his patience infinite as she practiced floating. Angela and Robert cooking dinner together, their movements synchronized from a week of shared domesticity. Mary falling asleep between them during movie night, her head on Robert's lap while Angela braided her hair. But Angela's past trauma with Gary's controlling behavior began to surface in unexpected ways. When Robert hired a decorator to update the guest room into a proper space for Mary, Angela panicked. "You should have asked me first," she said, her voice tight with anxiety as she stared at the fabric samples spread across the dining table. Robert looked up in surprise. "I thought you'd be happy." Mary mentioned she'd always wanted a purple room. "That's not the point." Angela began pacing, her hands shaking. "You made decisions about my daughter without consulting me, just like Gary used to do." "Angela, that's not—" Robert stopped himself, recognizing the signs of a trauma response. "You're right. I should have discussed it with you first. I'm sorry. But the damage was done." Angela's trust, so carefully built over their weeks together, began to crack under the pressure of constant scrutiny and her own protective instincts. The breaking point came when Fred White arrived at the penthouse with troubling news. "Gary's legal team has filed emergency motions," Fred announced, spreading documents across Robert's kitchen island. "They're claiming Angela is living with a man she barely knows, exposing Mary to potentially dangerous situations." Angela's hands trembled as she read the legal filing. Gary's lawyers had twisted every innocent moment into something sinister. Robert helping Mary with her bath became inappropriate male contact. Their family dinners were characterized as unstable domestic arrangements with shifting adult relationships. "How can they say these things?" Angela whispered. "Mary is thriving. She's happier than she's been in months." "They're also questioning Robert's finances," Fred continued reluctantly. "Gary's hired forensic accountants to examine Robert's business dealings. They're suggesting he's using his relationship with you to secure the children's hospital contract through positive publicity." Robert's face went white. "That's ridiculous. The hospital contract was awarded before I even met Angela." "I know that, and you know that," Fred said. "But Gary's team is very good at creating doubt. They're painting you as a manipulative businessman who saw an opportunity in Angela's vulnerability." Angela felt the walls closing in. Every insecurity she'd battled during her marriage to Gary came roaring back. Was she really so naive that she'd been manipulated again? Was Robert's kindness just another form of control? "I need some air," she said abruptly, heading for the balcony. Robert followed her outside, his expression concerned. "Angela, talk to me. What's going through your head?" "Maybe Gary's right," Angela said, the words tasting bitter. "Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I'm so desperate for love that I see it where it doesn't exist." "That's Gary talking, not you," Robert said firmly. "He's trying to get in your head, make you doubt what we have." "But what if he's not wrong?" Angela turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What if I've dragged you into my mess and now it's going to destroy your reputation, your business?" Robert reached for her, but Angela stepped back. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't make this harder than it already is." "What are you saying?" Angela's next words came out in a rush, before she could lose her nerve. "Maybe I should take Gary's deal. He offered me full custody if I never see you again, Mary would be safe, you'd be free of this circus, and… No. Robert's voice was sharp with panic. Angela, no, you can't seriously be considering that. Why not? What's the alternative? Dragging this out in court for months while they pick apart our relationship? Watching you lose everything because you tried to help us? I'm not going to lose everything, Robert said desperately. And even if I did, it would be worth it. You and Mary are worth everything. Angela's phone rang, interrupting their argument. Gary's name flashed on the screen, and Angela answered before Robert could stop her. Hello, Gary. I assume you've seen the legal filings. Gary's voice was smugly satisfied. This is just the beginning, Angela. I have resources you can't imagine. My mother's connections, private investigators, forensic accountants. We're going to examine every aspect of your boyfriend's life until we find something that sticks. What do you want, Gary? You know what I want. End this charade. Move out of the penthouse. Break up with your construction worker, and I'll give you reasonable custody terms. Keep fighting me, and I'll make sure you're painted as an unfit mother who chose sex over her daughter's welfare. Angela closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. And if I agree to your terms? Joint custody. You get married during the week. I get weekends and holidays. No more supervised visits. No more court battles. Clean slate. Robert was shaking his head frantically, but Angela couldn't look at him. I need time to think, she said. You have 24 hours, Gary replied. After that, the offer expires and we go to war. The line went dead, leaving Angela staring at her phone. You're not seriously considering this, Robert said, his voice hollow. I don't know what I'm considering, Angela admitted. All I know is that Mary doesn't deserve to be caught in the middle of a battle between adults. She's not in the middle. She's with people who love her, fighting for her right to be happy. But at what cost? Angela turned to face him fully. Robert, you've built an empire. You employ hundreds of people. Are you really willing to risk all of that for a woman you've known for 2 weeks? Yes, Robert said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. Angela's heart broke at the certainty in his voice. He meant it. He would sacrifice everything for her and Mary, which was exactly why she couldn't let him. That night, after Mary was asleep, Angela began packing. She moved quietly through the guest room, folding their clothes and gathering their few possessions. Each item felt like another piece of her heart being torn away. She was placing Mary's stuffed elephant in the suitcase when Robert appeared in the doorway. Don't do this, he said quietly. I have to. No, you don't. We can fight this together. We can win. Angela straightened, forcing herself to meet his eyes. Maybe, but even if we win in court, Gary will never stop. He'll appeal, file new motions, create new crises. Mary will spend her childhood as a weapon in a war between adults who claim to love her. So you're just giving up? Letting Gary win? I'm protecting my daughter, and you. Angela's voice broke on the last word. I won't be responsible for destroying everything you've built. Robert stepped into the room, his expression desperate. Angela, please, don't let fear make this decision for you. What we have is real. What Mary has here is real. I know it's real, Angela whispered. That's what makes this so hard. She zipped the suitcase closed with finality. I'll leave in the morning, before Mary wakes up. It'll be easier that way. Easier for who? Robert demanded. Because it sure as hell won't be easier for Mary when she wakes up and you're gone. She'll think she did something wrong. She'll think I drove you away. Angela hadn't considered that. The thought of Mary blaming herself, or worse, blaming Robert, made her stomach churn. I'll figure out what to tell her, she said weakly. Will you? Because I remember being 7 years old when my father left. My mother told me he had to go away for work. But I knew it was because I wasn't good enough to make him stay. The words hit Angela like physical blows. She couldn't do that to Mary. But she also couldn't continue to put Robert at risk. I don't know what else to do, she admitted, sinking onto the bed. Gary has unlimited resources. He can destroy us both if he wants to. Robert sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not touching. What if I told you I've been investigating Gary too? Angela's head snapped up. What? Fred's team uncovered some interesting irregularities in Gary's business accounts. Payments to offshore companies, unexplained cash transfers, tax discrepancies that could indicate fraud. You've been spying on him? I've been protecting us, Robert corrected. And what we found could change everything. Before Angela could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. Not from Gary this time, but from an unknown number. Stop investigating my son, or the child disappears permanently. You have 12 hours. Angela's blood turned to ice as she showed Robert the message. Who would send this? She whispered. Robert's face had gone deadly pale. Vivian Jones, Gary's mother. Have you ever had your past trauma make you push away someone who truly loved you? How do you learn to trust again after betrayal? Share your thoughts and hit subscribe for tomorrow's emotional conclusion. As they stared at the threatening message, a new sound reached them from Mary's room. Not the peaceful breathing of sleep, but complete silence. Robert was already moving before Angela could process what that meant. They rushed to Mary's room to find her bed empty, the window standing open to the night air. On the pillow, where Mary's head should have been, lay a single white rose and a note. She's safe, for now. Angela's scream pierced the night air as she stared at Mary's empty bed, the sound raw and primal, a mother's worst nightmare given voice. The white rose on the pillow seemed to mock them with its pristine beauty, while the threatening note trembled in Robert's hands like a death sentence. Call the police, Angela said, her voice breaking with panic as she rushed to the open window, searching desperately for any sign of her daughter in the darkness below. We can't, Robert replied grimly, his own hands shaking as he examined the window for evidence of forced entry. This isn't random. Vivian Jones has connections everywhere. Police, judges, politicians. If we involve law enforcement now, Mary could disappear completely into a system that protects people like the Jones. Angela began to hyperventilate, her chest tight with terror, as the full implications hit her. Her little girl was gone, taken from what should have been the safest place in the world, by people with unlimited resources and no conscience. I should have taken Gary's deal. I should have walked away when I had the chance. Angela, look at me. Robert gripped her shoulders firmly, forcing her to focus on his face instead of the empty bed. We're going to get Mary back, but I need you to stay strong. Can you do that? Angela nodded, though her whole body was shaking with adrenaline and fear. What do we do? Robert was already reaching for his phone, his movements swift and decisive. We call in every favor I have, and we use the evidence Fred found about Gary's finances. Over the next hour, Robert's penthouse transformed into a crisis center that rivaled anything seen in government buildings or military command posts. Fred White arrived with his entire legal team, their arms full of boxes containing financial documents and legal precedents. Jamie Brooks followed with 2 other private investigators, their laptops and surveillance equipment, turning the dining room into a high-tech operation center. Maps of the tri-state area spread across every surface. Phones rang constantly with updates from contacts across the city, and multiple computer screens displayed financial records, property deeds, and surveillance footage. Vivian Jones owns 17 properties in the tri-state area, Jamie reported, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she cross-referenced databases and public records. Estates, vacation homes, industrial buildings, even a few abandoned properties that could be used to hide someone. Mary could be at any of them. Start with the most isolated locations, Robert instructed, studying the map with the focused intensity of a general planning a military campaign. Somewhere they could keep a 7-year-old without attracting attention from neighbors or passersby. Angela sat in the corner, feeling helpless and useless as experts strategized around her. Every minute that passed was another minute of Mary's terror. Another moment her daughter might think she'd been abandoned by the mother who'd promised to always protect her. The guilt was crushing, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. Mrs. Mays, one of the investigators said gently, can you think of anywhere Gary might take Mary? Any place that has special significance to him or his family? Angela forced herself to focus, pushing through the panic to access memories she'd tried to forget. His family has a hunting lodge in the mountains, about 2 hours north of here. Gary used to go there when he wanted to think, or when he was angry and needed to cool off. That's remote enough, Jamie said, making notes. What else? His mother has a beach house in the Outer Banks, very secluded, accessible only by private road. And there's an old family property in Virginia, a plantation house that's been in the Jones family for generations. Robert studied the locations on the map, his expression grim. All of them are outside local jurisdiction. If Mary's at any of these places, we'll need federal involvement to get her back. I found something, Fred announced, looking up from his laptop with excitement and grim satisfaction. Gary's been embezzling from his company's employee pension fund, not just skimming, wholesale theft. We're talking about millions of dollars over the past 3 years. That explains the offshore accounts we found, one of the investigators added, highlighting transactions on her screen. He's been laundering the money through shell companies his mother helped him establish. Look at these incorporation dates. They all coincide with major withdrawals from the pension fund. Robert studied the financial documents with growing satisfaction and calculating intelligence. This isn't just embezzlement. It's organized fraud involving interstate commerce, federal charges that could put him away for decades. But how does this help us find Mary? Angela asked desperately, her voice cracking with strain. Because Gary's not just protecting his custody case anymore, Robert explained, his voice hard with determination. He's protecting himself from federal prison. If this information goes public, his life is over, his reputation, his freedom, his family's standing in the community, everything. Angela's phone rang at that moment, and Gary's name appeared on the screen. This time, Robert gestured for her to answer, quickly setting up a recording app while Fred prepared legal documents. Angela, I hear you've had some trouble tonight. Gary's voice was artificially calm, but Angela could hear the underlying tension and barely controlled panic. Where is my daughter, Gary? Angela's voice was steel, despite her terror. Safe. Much safer than she was in your boyfriend's penthouse, apparently. Amazing how easy it was to get her out without triggering any alarms. You really should invest in better security. Angela's grip tightened on the phone, her knuckles white with the effort of not screaming. If you hurt her... I would never hurt Mary. She's my daughter too. Gary's tone turned condescending, the same voice he'd used during their marriage, when explaining why she was wrong about everything. But you forced my hand, Angela. You and your boyfriend have been asking too many questions, digging into things that don't concern you. Robert took the phone from Angela's hands with a gentle but firm gesture. Gary, this is Robert. Let's talk man to man. There's nothing to discuss with you, Maze. You've served your purpose as a distraction, but now it's time for you to disappear. I don't think so, Robert said calmly, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone holding all the cards. In fact, I think you're the one who's going to disappear. Into federal prison, specifically. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats, and Angela could practically hear Gary's mind racing. I have no idea what you're talking about, Gary finally said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Pension fund embezzlement. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Money laundering through your mother's real estate investments. Robert's voice was deadly quiet, each word precisely delivered. Should I continue? Because I have spreadsheets, bank records, incorporation documents, enough evidence to put you away for the rest of your natural life. You're fishing, Gary said, but Angela could hear the panic creeping into his voice. Am I? Because the FBI forensic accountants who will be examining your books first thing Monday morning might disagree. Unless, of course, Mary is returned safely tonight. Gary's composure finally cracked completely. You have no idea what you're dealing with. My family has been in this city for 4 generations. We have connections you can't imagine. And I have evidence of federal crimes, Robert countered, his tone ice cold. Connections don't mean much when the FBI comes knocking with federal warrants. The line went dead, leaving them in tense silence. Will that work? Angela asked, hope and fear mooring in her voice. It has to, Robert replied, because if it doesn't, we're moving to Plan B. What's Plan B? Robert's expression was grim and determined. We make this personal. 20 minutes later, Angela's phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number with a local area code. Put it on speaker, Robert instructed, gesturing for the legal team to start recording. Hello? Angela answered, her voice carefully controlled. Angela, dear. Vivian Jones's cultured voice filled the room, dripping with false sweetness and barely concealed menace. I believe we need to have a conversation. Where is Mary? Angela demanded, her maternal instincts overriding any fear of the powerful woman on the other end of the line. The child is perfectly safe, I assure you. She's having ice cream and watching cartoons as we speak. Quite content, actually. I want to talk to her. I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment, but I can arrange for her safe return if you're willing to be reasonable. Robert stepped closer to the phone, his presence steadying Angela. What do you want, Mrs. Jones? Ah, Mr. Mays. I was wondering when you'd join our conversation. Vivian's tone turned cold and calculating. I want you to stop investigating my family's business affairs. I want you to end your relationship with Angela immediately, and I want you both to disappear from our lives permanently. And in exchange? Robert asked, his voice carefully neutral. Mary comes home safely, and Gary drops all custody claims. Angela gets what she originally wanted, her daughter, and freedom from my son's attention. Angela felt torn between relief and heartbreak. Mary would be safe, but it would mean losing Robert forever, giving up the first real happiness she'd known in years. How do we know you'll keep your word? Robert asked. Because, unlike my son, I'm not emotional about this situation. I simply want it resolved with minimum damage to my family's reputation. Before Angela could respond, they heard a small voice in the background, muffled, but unmistakably Mary's. Grandma Vivi, I want my mommy. When can I go home? Mary, Angela called out, but the background noise was quickly muffled, as if someone had moved away from the phone. As you can hear, the child is becoming distressed, Vivian said smoothly, her voice taking on a threatening edge. I suggest you make your decision quickly. You have 30 minutes. The line went dead again, leaving them in charged silence. Angela began pacing frantically, her mind racing with impossible choices. We have to agree. We can't risk Mary's safety. Angela, think about what you're saying, Robert pleaded, following her across the room. If we give in now, they'll have this power over us forever. What happens the next time they want something? There won't be a next time if we disappear like she wants. You're talking about running away, starting over somewhere else, always looking over your shoulder, never feeling safe. Angela stopped pacing and looked at him with tear-filled eyes. You're talking about risking my daughter's life. No, I'm talking about ending this permanently. Gary's embezzlement isn't just about money, it's about power. He's been stealing from working families, destroying their retirement security. If we expose him, he goes to prison and can never threaten Mary again. But what if? Angela's protest was interrupted by her phone buzzing with a text message. The message was a photo of Mary sitting in what looked like a luxurious library. Holding a piece of paper with today's date clearly visible, she looked unharmed but scared, her eyes red from crying, her favorite stuffed animal clutched tightly in her arms. Below the photo was a message. She's asking for her Robert daddy. Sweet child. It would be tragic if she had to grow up without either of her parents. That's a direct threat, Fred said, studying the message with the eyes of someone who'd seen every kind of legal manipulation. They're not just threatening custody anymore. They're threatening physical harm. Angela felt her world tilting dangerously. They'd actually hurt her? Vivian Jones didn't get where she is by making empty threats, Robert said grimly, his face pale but determined. But she also didn't get there by weaving loose ends. What does that mean? Robert met her eyes with devastating honesty. It means even if we agree to her terms, there's no guarantee Mary stays safe long-term. Vivian sees us as a permanent threat to her family's secrets. Angela sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the impossible situation. Every choice led to potential disaster. Give in to the demands, and they'd always be vulnerable to future threats. Refuse, and Mary might pay the price immediately. There has to be another option, she whispered. Jamie Brooks looked up from her laptop, her expression suddenly excited. There might be. I've been tracking the metadata from that photo. It was taken at the Jones estate in Harbor Hills, the same place we retrieved Mary the first time. So we know where she is, Robert said, hope creeping into his voice. More than that, the estate security system was recently upgraded by Apex Security, a company Robert's construction firm has worked with extensively on commercial projects. Robert's eyes lit up with understanding. I know their system architecture inside and out. We've installed dozens of similar systems. We might be able to find a way in. That's breaking and entering, Fred warned, his legal training overriding any emotional sympathy. If we're caught, we go to jail, Robert interrupted. If we don't try, Mary might never come home. Angela looked around the room at all these people who'd committed themselves to saving her daughter. People who barely knew her, but were willing to risk everything because it was right. The lawyers who could lose their licenses, the investigators who could lose their credentials, Robert who could lose his freedom and his business empire. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady for the first time in hours. Before Robert could answer, Angela's phone rang one more time. Gary's number appeared on the screen, but when she answered, it was Mary's terrified voice that came through the speaker. Mommy, I'm scared. They won't let me go home. Mary, baby, I'm here. Mommy's coming to get you. Angela's voice cracked with emotion as she heard her daughter's fear. They said you don't want me anymore. They said you chose Robert over me. Angela's heart shattered into a million pieces. That's not true, sweetheart. I would never choose anyone over you. You're my whole world. Promise? I promise. I love you more than anything in this world, and I'm coming to bring you home right now. The phone was taken away before Mary could respond, and Gary's voice came back on the line, cold and calculating. Touching, he said with cruel satisfaction. You have 15 minutes to decide, Angela. After that, Mary learns what happens to little girls whose mothers make bad choices. The line went dead, leaving them with a countdown that would determine everything: Mary's future, their family's survival, and whether love could triumph over money, power, and generations of entitlement. Angela looked at the timer Robert had set on his phone, 14 minutes and counting, and made the hardest decision of her life. We go get her, she said, her voice steel, whatever it takes. 15 minutes, Angela stared at the countdown timer Robert had set on his phone, watching their daughter's future tick away second by second. Around them, the penthouse buzzed with urgent activity as Robert's team prepared for what might be their only chance to save Mary. The security system has a 2-minute window during shift changes, Jamie explained, pulling up the estate's layout on her laptop. Guards rotate at midnight. If we move fast, we can get in and out before they realize anything's wrong. And if we don't? Angela asked, though she already knew the answer. Then we all go to prison, and Mary disappears forever, Robert said bluntly. But that's not going to happen. Angela's hands shook as she watched the timer hit 10 minutes. In her mind, she could hear Mary's terrified voice, see her daughter's tears. The little girl who'd drawn pictures of their family, who called Robert her Robert Daddy, who'd finally found happiness after years of witnessing her parents' toxic marriage. I can't let you do this, Angela said suddenly. I won't let you risk everything for us. Robert looked up from the security plans, his expression fierce. Angela, we've been through this. No, we haven't. Angela stood up, decision crystallizing in her mind. There's another way. She reached for her phone and dialed Gary's number before anyone could stop her. Angela? Gary's voice was smug with anticipated victory. Ready to be reasonable? Yes, Angela said, her voice steady despite her breaking heart. I accept your mother's terms. I'll leave Robert, disappear from your lives, and give you whatever custody arrangement you want. Angela, no. Robert lunged for the phone, but she stepped away. But I have conditions, Angela continued. I want to speak to Mary first. I want to explain to her personally why I have to go away. And I want the exchange to happen at the courthouse with Judge Moore present. Gary was quiet for a moment. Why the courthouse? Because I want legal documentation of our agreement. I want ironclad guarantees that Mary will be safe and that you'll honor your word about custody. Fine, Gary agreed. But if you try anything clever, I won't. I just want my daughter safe. Angela's voice broke on the last word. 1 hour. Judge Moore's courtroom. She hung up and immediately faced Robert's anguished expression. What the hell are you doing? He demanded. What I should have done from the beginning, Angela replied. Protecting my daughter. By sacrificing our future? By letting Gary win? Angela's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained resolute. By choosing Mary over everything else, the way a mother should. Fred White looked up from his legal documents. Angela, this plan could actually work. If we can get Gary to commit to terms in front of Judge Moore, with everything on record, ... Then what? Robert asked bitterly. Angela disappears. Mary grows up thinking her mother abandoned her for a man, and Gary gets exactly what he wanted. No, Angela said quietly. Mary grows up safe, loved, and free from this nightmare. That's all that matters. The drive to the courthouse was silent, except for the sound of Angela quietly crying in the passenger seat. Robert's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. But he didn't try to change her mind again. He understood, even if he hated it, that Angela was doing what she believed was best for Mary. Judge Moore had agreed to the emergency session, her stern voice over the phone making it clear she was growing tired of the Jones family's dramatic tactics. The courthouse felt eerie at midnight, security guards escorting them through empty hallways to the familiar courtroom where this all began. Gary was already there with his legal team, looking confident and satisfied. Vivian Jones sat in the front row like a queen holding court, her expression coolly triumphant. But it was the small figure sitting beside her that made Angela's heart stop. Mary looked tiny in the vast courtroom, still wearing her pajamas from when she'd been taken. Her face was streaked with tears, and she clutched a stuffed animal Angela didn't recognize. "Mommy!" Mary tried to run to her, but Gary caught her arm. "Wait, sweetheart," he said with false gentleness. "Mommy and Daddy need to talk to the judge first." Judge Moore entered and surveyed the scene with obvious displeasure. "This is highly irregular. Mr. Jones, you'd better have a very good explanation for why this child was removed from her mother's custody in the middle of the night." "Your Honor," Gary's lawyer immediately began spinning the narrative. "Our client discovered evidence that Miss Jones was exposing the child to an unstable and potentially dangerous environment." "Enough." Judge Moore cut him off. "I want to hear from Miss Jones directly. What are you proposing to resolve the situation?" Angela stood on shaking legs, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. "Your Honor, I'm prepared to accept Mr. Jones's property, custody terms in exchange for my daughter's immediate safety and well-being." "What terms, specifically?" Angela's voice grew stronger as she spoke, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. "I will relocate out of state, ending my relationship with Mr. Mays. Mr. Jones will have primary custody, with me receiving supervised visits twice monthly." "Mommy, no." Mary's anguished cry echoed through the courtroom. "I don't want to live with Daddy. I want to go home with you and Robert." Gary's face flushed red. "Mary, that's enough. No, Daddy, you're mean and you yell and you make Mommy cry." Mary's 7-year-old honesty cut through the legal proceedings like a blade. "Robert never yells. He makes pancakes and helps with homework, and he loves us." Judge Moore's expression shifted as she studied Mary's distressed face. "Young lady, no one is forcing you to say anything. But if you'd like to tell me how you're feeling." "I'm listening." Mary looked around the courtroom, her gaze settling on Angela. "Mommy, are you really going away?" Angela's careful composure cracked. "I have to, baby girl, to keep you safe." "But I don't want to be safe without you," Mary said, her voice small but determined. "I want our family, all 3 of us." Robert had been silent through the proceedings, but now he stood up. "Your Honor, may I address the court?" Judge Moore nodded, and Robert moved to stand beside Angela, his presence steadying her. "Your Honor, I love Angela Jones and her daughter. Not because I'm trying to win a contract or improve my reputation, but because they've brought light back into my life after years of darkness." His voice carried quiet conviction. "I'm prepared to provide financial support, character references, whatever the court requires to ensure Mary's safety and happiness." "Mr. Mays," Vivian Jones' cultured voice interrupted, "surely you understand this arrangement isn't in anyone's best interest." "Actually, Mrs. Jones," Judge Moore said sharply, "I'm beginning to think this arrangement serves everyone's interests except the child's." Angela felt a flicker of hope, but quickly suppressed it. She couldn't risk Mary's safety on judicial sympathy. "Your Honor," she began, but Judge Moore held up a hand. Miss Jones, before you say anything else, I want you to know that the court has received some very interesting financial documents regarding Mr. Jones' business practices. Gary went pale. Your Honor, I don't see how my business affairs are relevant to. Embezzlement from employee pension funds seems quite relevant to determining fitness as a parent, Judge Moore replied coolly. As does money laundering and tax evasion. The courtroom erupted in whispered conferences between Gary and his lawyers. Vivian Jones's composed facade finally cracked, revealing the calculating predator beneath. Your Honor, she said, standing with regal authority, I'm sure any irregularities can be explained. Mrs. Jones, Judge Moore interrupted, you might want to focus on explaining why your grandson was removed from his mother's custody in violation of my explicit court order. Angela's heart began to race. Was it possible that Judge Moore was seeing through Gary's manipulation? Furthermore, the judge continued, I've had a very enlightening conversation with Mary's school counselor. Did you know, Mr. Jones, that your daughter has shown remarkable improvement in her emotional well-being since living with Miss Jones and Mr. Mays? Her grades have improved, her social interactions are more positive, and she stopped having the anxiety episodes that were documented during your previous custody periods. Gary's lawyer was frantically whispering in his ear, but Gary pushed him away. That's irrelevant. I'm her father. I have rights. You have responsibilities, Judge Moore corrected sharply, and based on the evidence before me, you failed to meet them. Angela couldn't breathe. Was this really happening? Was Judge Moore about to rule in their favor? However, the judge continued, and Angela's heart sank. There remains the question of the unconventional nature of Miss Jones's current living arrangement. Vivian Jones seized the opening. Exactly, Your Honor. A woman living with a man she's known for mere weeks, exposing a child to love. Mary's clear voice cut through the adult conversation. He loves us and we love him. Why is that bad? Judge Moore looked directly at Mary. It's not bad, sweetheart. Love is never bad. But adults have to make sure that love is real and lasting, especially when children are involved. Angela felt her last hope crumbling. Even with Gary's crimes exposed, she couldn't prove to the court that her relationship with Robert was genuine, permanent, worthy of Mary's trust. That's when Robert did something that stunned everyone in the courtroom. He dropped to one knee right there in front of the judge's bench, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Angela, his voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. I know this isn't how either of us imagined this moment, but I can't let you walk away thinking that what we have isn't real, isn't permanent, isn't worth fighting for. Angela's hands flew to her mouth as Robert opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful diamond ring. I love you. I love Mary. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that every single day. Will you marry me? The courtroom held its collective breath. Gary's face was purple with rage. Vivian Jones looked like she'd swallowed poison, and Mary was bouncing with excitement. Say yes, Mommy, say yes. Angela looked into Robert's eyes and saw her future. Not just safety or security, but genuine love, partnership, family. Everything she'd thought was lost forever. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. As Robert slipped the ring onto her finger, Mary broke free from Gary's grip and ran to them, throwing her arms around both adults. We're really going to be a family, she cried. Judge Moore watched this display of genuine emotion, then turned her sharp gaze to Gary. Mr. Jones, given the evidence of financial crimes and your repeated violations of court orders, I'm terminating your parental rights effective immediately. You can't do that, Gary exploded. I'll appeal. I'll fight this. From federal prison? Judge Moore asked mildly. Because based on the documents I've reviewed, that's where you'll be residing for the foreseeable future. As security guards moved toward Gary, Vivian Jones stood with cold dignity. This isn't over, she said quietly, her eyes fixed on Angela. My family doesn't forget or forgive. Angela felt a chill run through her, even as she held Mary and Robert close. Gary was defeated, but his mother's threat carried the weight of generations of power and influence. Judge Moore's gavel came down with finality. Case closed. Miss Jones retains full custody. Mr. and Mrs. Mays to be, she said with the faintest smile. Congratulations on your engagement. As they left the courthouse as a family, Mary skipping between her mother and future stepfather, Angela should have felt nothing but joy. Instead, Vivian Jones' parting words echoed in her mind like a promise of future storms. Some battles might be over, but the war with the Jones family was just beginning. 6 months later, Angela stood in the principal's office of Riverside Academy, a specialized school for children with learning differences that she'd only dared to dream about. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the photo on her desk, her wedding picture showing her, Robert, and Mary laughing together as they cut their cake. "Mrs. Mays," her secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Your 3 o'clock appointment is here." Angela smiled at the name that still felt wonderfully new. Mrs. Mays, wife, mother, educator, partner in a love story that had seemed impossible just months ago. The door opened to reveal a nervous-looking mother holding the hand of a shy 8-year-old boy with thick glasses. "Please, sit down," Angela said warmly, remembering her own fear during Mary's early struggles with reading. "Tell me about David." As she listened to another mother's concerns about her child's learning differences, Angela felt the deep satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. Robert's construction company had built this school, but it was her vision, her expertise, her dream made real through their partnership. At home that evening, Angela found Robert and Mary in the kitchen, flour covering every surface as they attempted to bake cookies for Mary's school fundraiser. Robert's hair was dusted white, and Mary had chocolate smudges on her cheeks. "How did the meeting go with the new family?" Robert asked, kissing Angela's temple as she surveyed the disaster zone that had once been their pristine kitchen. "Wonderful. David reminds me of Mary when she first started struggling with reading. His mother has that same scared, protective look I used to see in the mirror. And now look at our Mary," Robert said proudly, watching as their daughter carefully measured ingredients with the mathematical precision that had replaced her earlier learning anxieties. Mary looked up from her mixing bowl. "Mommy, guess what? I got picked to read the morning announcements next week." Angela's heart swelled with pride. The shy, anxious child who used to hide when called upon was now confident enough to speak over the school's PA system. "That's amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Can Robert come watch?" Mary asked, still occasionally using his first name even though she'd started calling him Dad months ago. "Of course, I'll be there," Robert said, ruffling her hair with a flower-covered hand. "I wouldn't miss it." Their evening routine had become a treasured ritual. Homework at the kitchen island, while Angela prepared dinner. Robert helping with math problems while sharing stories about his construction projects. Mary's laughter filling spaces that had once echoed with tension and fear. After Mary was in bed, Angela and Robert sat on their balcony, overlooking the city, the same spot where they'd shared their first kiss and faced their greatest fears. Robert's construction company had thrived in the months since the custody battle. The children's hospital wing nearly complete. The Emma Sarah Memorial Wing would be dedicated next month, honoring Robert's first family, while celebrating the new life he'd built. "Any word from Fred about the Jones investigation?" Angela asked, settling into Robert's arms. "Gary pled guilty to federal charges last week. He'll be in prison for at least 8 years. Robert's voice was satisfied but not vindictive. "Vivian's been suspiciously quiet since the FBI seized her assets connected to the money laundering." Angela shivered slightly despite the warm evening air. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her to find some way to hurt us." "She can't touch us now," Robert said firmly. "We're legally married." "I bought it the day after our first kiss," Robert admitted. "I was planning to wait months, do it properly with dinner and roses and all the traditional romance. But when I saw you willing to walk away rather than risk Mary's safety, I knew I couldn't let you leave without knowing how completely I loved you both." Mary still talks about it. Her favorite part of the whole story is that you proposed in a courtroom. She said it was better than a movie. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below. Angela's phone buzzed with a text from Mary's teacher praising her daughter's progress in reading. Small daily victories that meant everything. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in that courtroom that day?" Angela asked. Robert considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other eventually. Some connections are too strong to miss forever." Even with all the obstacles, Gary's manipulation, the legal battles, my trust issues? Especially because of the obstacles, Robert said. They proved that what we have is worth fighting for. Easy love doesn't teach you what you're capable of. Angela thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Broken, scared, convinced she didn't deserve happiness. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but through countless small moments of choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over despair. I love our life, she said simply. So do I, all of it. The chaos, the challenges, the everyday miracles of Mary growing up feeling safe and loved. As if summoned by their conversation, Mary appeared in the doorway wearing her favorite pajamas. I can't sleep, she announced. Can we build a blanket fort? Robert and Angela exchanged amused glances. Their daughter had outgrown many childish things, but blanket forts remained a family tradition from the early days when comfort and security were precious commodities. Of course, Angela said, but just one story, and then it's really bedtime. 20 minutes later, they were all squeezed into an elaborate construction of chairs, sheets, and pillows in the living room. Mary snuggled between her parents, while Robert told the story of the 3 bears, with dramatic voices that made her giggle. Tell the story about how you and Mommy met, Mary requested as the bear tale ended. Again? Angela laughed. You know that story by heart, but I liked hearing it. Especially the part where Robert saved you in the courthouse. I didn't save your mother, Robert corrected gently. We saved each other. And me too, Mary added sleepily. We all saved each other. Angela looked at her husband and daughter in the warm glow of their makeshift fort and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of people willing to face whatever came together. Have you ever had someone love you back to life when you thought you were broken beyond repair? How did love surprise you when you needed it most? Share your stories of second chances in the comments below. If this story of love conquering fear touched your heart, hit subscribe and the notification bell. Tomorrow brings another tale of unexpected love and the courage to trust again. Join me tomorrow for another passionate story about love appearing when we least expect it but need it most. As Mary finally drifted off to sleep between them, Angela and Robert quietly carried her to bed, tucking her in with the gentle care of parents who understood how precious and fragile happiness could be. Back in their own bedroom, Angela caught sight of herself in the mirror, no longer the broken woman who'd collapsed in a courthouse, but someone radiant with love and purpose. No regrets? Robert asked, echoing the question from their first night together. Only that we waited so long to find each other, Angela replied, pulling him close. Outside, the city hummed with the lives of millions of people, some of whom were probably facing their own impossible situations, their own moments of choosing between fear and hope. Angela sent up a silent prayer that they would find their own courage, their own unexpected rescuers, their own second chances at happiness. Because sometimes, when you're broken and falling, a stranger steps forward to catch you. And sometimes, that stranger becomes the love of your life. Sometimes, fairy tales do come true. In courthouses at midnight, with flower-covered kitchens and blanket forts, with everyday miracles disguised as ordinary love. And sometimes, just sometimes, being brave enough to say yes to love changes everything.